By the end of this video, you will have a much clearer idea of how to deal with and manage autistic meltdowns. If you like the video, please subscribe, please like the channel, and you'll be kept updated with new videos and resources. Autistic meltdown is a phrase that autistic people tend to use to describe a really intense emotional response. So it tends to be a response which is out of all proportion to what triggered that response. It might involve screaming, crying, running off, shouting at other people. Some people in a meltdown situation tend to self-harm or do something harmful to themselves. What's really at the core of a meltdown is it feels like an out of control response. It's a very, very intense response. In children, meltdowns are sometimes mistaken for tantrum, and they do look like very, very extreme tantrums. Unlike tantrums, they're not driven by a desire to get something. They're driven by a desire of being overwhelmed, out of control, and unable to cope. So if you've ever had a meltdown, you will know how horrible meltdowns feel. And in this video, I'm going to give you 5 strategies that you can begin to adopt to help minimize meltdowns and to help get over them. And before going any further, it's probably important to say that if you're in a meltdown situation, there is very little you can do about it. You're actually in the midst of the storm. But what you can work on is beginning to sort of help minimize the risk of a meltdown happening and begin to think about, how do I get over a meltdown, which is what we're going to have a look at here. So one of the most important things you can do is to begin to identify some of the triggers that lead up to a meltdown. And a really good idea is to think about an emotional timeline. So part of that emotional timeline is thinking about, what is the lead up to a meltdown? And often meltdowns happen after several triggers. So it's not just one thing. It's one thing on top of another, until you get to the point you can't cope. But there are also some specific situations which are just really impossible for some people to deal with. So I'll use the example which I find really hard, which is going to a supermarket. So I might go to a supermarket, things might be okay in the lead up, but I get to the supermarket and I know that that could be a very, very triggering experience for me. So identify your triggers and also start to learn, are there some early signs that you're beginning to get a bit meltdowny? Have you begun to feel a little bit anxious? Are you getting a bit snappy with people or feeling agitated? Are you walking up and down more? Or if you've got any usual stimming behaviours, are you engaging in these anymore? Are there some minor signs that you can get used to which are telling you that you're becoming distressed? And if you can notice them earlier on in your emotional timeline, you can begin to perhaps adapt your behavior. So don't pile that next thing on top of how you're already feeling, which might lead to a meltdown. Just think, what can I not take on here to try and stay in control? So the next thing you can think about is, how can you access the right type of support? So one of the worst things, if you're beginning to feel meltdowny or if you're in the midst of a full meltdown, is somebody heaping on pressure or saying or doing things which actually makes you feel far, far worse. So in that situation, it might not be your experience, but it's an example. It's very common that you can't communicate. You can't hear people properly. You can't express what you feel. So somebody trying to be helpful and saying, tell me how you feel, please explain it. What can I do for you? Might just be enough to send you completely over the edge. So make sure that other people around you understand what your personal needs are when you're beginning to feel like you're about to have a meltdown. Do you just need to be left alone, for instance? Your strategy will be right for you and it might be different for somebody else, but work out what you need and explain that clearly to other people who are maybe doing something which is completely wrong for you when you're beginning to feel like you might have a meltdown. Another really important thing if you are prone to having meltdowns is to let go of shame. Now, I know that meltdowns are horrible to have. I also know that they're really unpleasant for other people to be around. So we're not saying that meltdowns are nothing. We're not trying to minimize them. But if you feel really ashamed and bad about yourself for having meltdowns, you're only really going to make the problem worse. So if you have meltdowns, if you're autistic, if it's part of your experience, that isn't your fault. And blaming yourself and letting your self-esteem be affected really is just going to have a huge impact on you. So acknowledge that you have meltdowns, have any conversations that you need to have with other people who might be affected, but let go of the shame. If we return to that emotional timeline, part of what we can think about is the build up to a meltdown, but we can also think about the come down from a meltdown. So if we think about we've had the meltdown, it's been horrible, they can leave you feeling very disturbed, very upset. There might be an aftermath if it involves other people. How do we come down? And again, it's important for other people to know what's important to you. So you might just have to go away to a dark room, shut yourself off and be alone. And actually, if somebody else tries to come in and talk to you at that point, it makes matters worse. Or perhaps you have a partner or a friend or a parent or child, and actually just having a cuddle is something really great without having to talk to them. Maybe that helps you. Maybe it's going to take you a few days to get over your meltdown, at which point you have to make sure that you're not taking on other responsibilities or you're cancelling work meetings or whatever you have to do to look after yourself in the come down, and realise there is a come down. You don't just go over a meltdown straight away. So identify what you have to do for yourself on that emotional timeline. So the final thing you can think about is, again, acknowledging this as part of your experience and have coping strategies in place. Now, we can't always avoid things in life that are going to stress us or potentially lead us to feel as if we're having a meltdown. It might be that we have to do a meeting or we have to go to our child's school to talk about something. We just can't avoid everything. But do think about what are the big triggers for you? What can you avoid? What can you minimize? How can you organize your week so that you're not taking on too much at one time? With a bit of organization, support, taking ownership of the things that are really difficult for you, you might just find that you can organize your life better in order to minimize that buildup of stuff that could lead to a complete meltdown. If you want to check out the website, you can find the website address here. You can go to the website where I've got some free resources that you can download today to help you deal with emotional regulation and to help you identify your own emotional timelines so that you can begin to get more in control of your meltdowns. Thanks for listening.